Hello, my trading friends, and welcome back to Forex Focus, brought to you by IG. Huge, multi-decade, 30-year lows being seen in the Japanese yen in light of some recent news from the Bank of Japan, how their economy is looking overall, and some continued strength from the U.S. and the U.S. dollar, all coming together to produce fresh 30-year lows for this Japanese yen and highs for dollar yen. And I'm sure this is one that you could definitely look at some crosses if you're looking for either better value from a long yen side or better value from a short yen side. A lot of different ways to cut this yen versus euro, pound, and everything else. But today we're going to look at it versus the U.S. dollar. And let's start by looking at this price action, as it's been a hell of a run to the upside for this U.S. dollar, smashing through 151 and right there at those 30-year highs, which we'll get a little bit closer on in just a second. But the 151 and above has been approximately those 30-year highs, and it's not only been what we saw earlier this year and a little bit in 2023, which was kind of trading around that 150 level and getting close to 151 and coming lower. As you can see there in February, there was a lot of dancing back and forth between 150 and 151. It's been a pretty straight shot from recent lows around 146 all the way up, clean through 151, a straight shot of more than 400 pips to the upside in the last week of trading in this major pair. And you can take a look at this from a couple of different angles, which we will in just a second, from the Japanese side or the U.S. side. But really seeing a worst case scenario for this yen right now, given the U.S. strength and the relative Japanese weakness. And we'll tie both their GDPs together and talk interest rates in just a second. But I do want to highlight what the 30-year low for yen was. It was approximately 151.70. That's the daily close that has been the highest for this dollar yen in the last 30 years plus, and that was back in the last in November 2023. And you could see in the intraday trade here recently, this dollar yen market getting up and beyond that level for a brief period, and right now trading right there. We'll see if it breaks beyond that 151.70 30-year high for this market, or if it just touches that and comes off. These markets are so funny sometimes that they'll get to these historic levels and then come clean off of them. But I mean, it's really interesting to see this market hit this 151 area, like I say, the approximate high for dollars, low for yen for the last 30 years. It's hit this a couple of times in the last year or so of trading. You go back to the dollar's initial bull run in 2021 and 2022, and this market got up there, and then dollar backed off a little bit. And then in 23, on some renewed Japanese weakness and some renewed U.S. strength, got right up there again. And now this will effectively be the third time in the last couple of years that they're hitting this historic level. And so we'll see if they finally break beyond this 150 to the tune of at least more than 100 or 200 pips. But let's see what's going on in these two economies that's causing some of this historic price action. On the U.S. side of things, it's been just consistent U.S. performance from an economic standpoint. You see these GDP growth rates, and you might say, oh, well, 2, 3, 4% growth rates, that's not anything to necessarily write home about. But when you tie that in with the fact that the U.S. has had 5.5% interest rates for the last several months, and they're still seeing this consistent GDP growth, and they're still seeing, I mean, you dig into the employment numbers, still relatively high, and that inflation has come off of its highs, but has still shown that the U.S. is seeing strong growth, whereas some places globally, they're witnessing some deflation, some negative GDP growth rates. And in Japan, you've seen some negative GDP growth rates in the most recent few quarters there. Very different chart when you look at the last year or so of growth rates. You had a stark negative print there a quarter ago, and the most recent quarter right there around 0%. And you tie that in with a very different interest rate environment in Japan. They've had negative interest rates from the last 5 years plus until the most recent Bank of Japan meeting, where they hiked from negative 10 basis points to 0%. And so you can see here when you tie in the economic growth that these two major economies are seeing with the types of policy, the U.S. seeing contractionary high interest rate policy, and Japan seeing expansionary low interest rate policy, not only low, but negative, and they're still not able to necessarily get this Japanese economy consistently growing. And that's what has combined to get you these historically low yen prices and high US dollar prices. And now, the question becomes, are we going to bounce off of this level, or is the Japanese yen due for an all-out crash through these prices? I alluded to earlier how in 2022 and 2023 and now here in 2024, we've gotten up to this 150 area, and you can see in those past instances it has bounced off of it, which it absolutely can do again. But is the third time the charm here for this US dollar? You take a look at the 2023 range, and it was about 2,300 pips from low to high. And you look here in 2024, and you might say, oh, well, we're already at this historic high. It can't go much higher. Well, the range for this year so far, though it's been a pretty volatile one, it's only been about 1,000 pips from low to high. And so if we see another volatile year for dollar yen like we did in 2023, it can be many more hundreds of pips to the upside. It can also obviously reverse and like it has been in the past, be to the downside. But a lot of potential outcomes on the table for this dollar yen. Kind of underrated, has been the biggest mover, the most volatile major pair in recent years. And you can see moving thousands of pips on an annual basis here recently. But you've got the economic piece, you've got the interest rate piece. If the U.S. continues to see strong data, maybe they do finally print 152, 153 and beyond. I believe the highs that IG has data for going back to 1990, that 30-year plus high in this market is still in the 150 handle. I don't know if we've printed 160 in the last, since 1990, since IG has data for. But, I mean, could be on the table here if this Japanese yen does fall into all-out crash mode. We'll continue to watch this major pair and monitor the situation in Japan, as well as the continued U.S. dollar strength.